Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Kilger. I'm the managing editor of Feed and Grain. Today, I'm talking with Christy Swoboda, technical service director for Romer Labs. At the end of December last year, Romer Labs and Feed and Grain put on a webinar about mycotoxin trends in 2021. And now Christy is joining us to give us an update on all things mycotoxins and what's changed since that webinar. Hi, Christy.
Hello.
So, can we look back at the 2021 harvest, which is complete now? Can you kind of tell me what you observed?
Sure. So when we look back at the 2021 harvest, I will say for the most part, the levels of mycotoxin contamination that we observed analytically fell along those more historical lines. So we see low levels of aflatoxin, of fumonisin, of Don specifically. And then we see those typical regionalized pockets where we
Mm.
might find some higher contamination levels that are kind of experienced year over year. This year, along with the last couple, we've added in additional focus on ochratoxin A and even T2 and HT2 into our analytical testing. Those are really driven by some industry partners. Say the infant soy based market has an additional focus for ochratoxin, even the poultry industry or the pet food industry wanting to drive down some analytical detection limits for T2 and HT2. But really, if we just look at the crop harvest in general, I'd say nothing news and noteworthy per se. When we talk about kind of regionalized occurrences of mycotoxins, you can think about where in the country we experience more extreme weather patterns. So those extreme patterns are kind of where we find those pockets of maybe, hey, we have more aflatoxin here, or oh, we have more Don there
Okay.
per se.
So, what kind of extent do those events really impact mycotoxin levels? I'm thinking of storms and floods and all that kind of, but even extreme heat and things like that, right?
Right. So, yeah, weather is actually the largest contributor to mycotoxins across the country. So, really, any weather event, like you just mentioned, be it drought stress, heavy rainfall, maybe, a hurricanes come through, could have tornadoes, or just high winds, hail that falls. Really, any of those weather events that occur on the plant can lead to that plant being under stress. And really, whenever there's stress on the plant, it kind of creates those additional avenues for the mycotoxin development to occur. If we just talk about drought stress and if we just talk about the corn crop, it's often brought to mind immediately, oh, let's watch for aflatoxin and oh, let's watch for fumonisin. So if you think kind of year over year, fumonisin is known to occur at some level in the corn crop coming out of the south. Well, you think about July and August summers in the southern US, they're hot and dry. So the weather, is definitely the largest contributor to that mycotoxin development.
Were there any specific weather events or trends that you'd like to discuss? Anything that stood out to you?
Right. Nothing in particular from 2021. We did have, I believe it was Hurricane Ida came through,
Mhm.
made some in the peanut industry a little nervous for a little while. Luckily, nothing regarding mycotoxins kind of came to fruition there. But with each of those industries and in each of the different regions, we just year over year know what to watch for, know where to kind of put our additional focuses, and kind of hope for the best.
During our webinar we had towards the end of 2021, we had several questions about various mycotoxin testing and stuff. One of them was about sampling. Can you kind of give your recommendations on what a good sample is and how to take a good sample?
Sure. So when we talk mycotoxin, sampling and sample to sample variability is a topic that we still discuss today, as we could see by the questions coming in, but also is something, we've discussed over the decades. Part of the reason that it continues to remain a focus is that mycotoxins are distributed in a non homogeneous fashion,
Mhm.
either within the field or within the lot of grain. So if you think about a field of corn, or if you think about a rail car, or think about a truck, the mycotoxins are going to impact some of the corn kernels potentially, or a different commodity, but they're not going to impact every one of them. So we have to take extra care and be very diligent that when we pull samples, that we really pull representative samples to make sure, one, on an analytical basis, that we don't miss the mycotoxins, in which case we would then underreport a true contamination value. Or, on the flip side, we could hit what's called a hot spot, and we
Mm,
could find all of the mycotoxins in the sample that we pull. And then at that point, we've deemed a load or a lot contaminated, when maybe it really isn't as bad as that data point says it is. So, time and time again, I go back to an old study, but it was well designed, and it's from the USDA. It goes back to a couple gentlemen, Whitaker and Dickin, that did it. There's many new reports, studies, publications, journals, USDA handbook, all of those things that talk about sampling guides. But through the old USDA study that I talk about, they determined analytically that only 2% of the error in analysis is related to the end method that a consumer detect or selects. That 98% of any error that you get in mycotoxin analysis is associated with the sampling. And if we think about it, just to walk through it, if we assume a lot is like 50,000 kgs,
mhm,
we need to take that 50,000 kg sample and come up with a 2 kilogram sample to submit for testing. So, how well do we pull from little spots out of 50,000 kg to get our two? And then once we get our 2 kilograms, we're going to put it through a mill, we're going to grind it, we're going to homogenize it, and then we're ultimately going to take 10 to 50 grams from that
mhm.
for our analytical method. So we're starting with something around 50,000 kg, and we're ending up with maybe 10 grams for testing. So you can just kind of assume in the scale down of that, analytically, where things can go wrong in that sample. Even the USDA handbook or USDA guidebook on mycotoxin sampling, they reference pulling like 1,000 gram on the low end to maybe a 10-pound sample on the high end. And
Mm.
again, you're taking 1,000 grams to 10 pounds, and you're trying to make 10 grams out of it. So sampling is, to me, one of the most critical things that we have to be attentive to really understand the true and the accurate mycotoxin contamination level in anything.
Excellent. Yeah, I've noticed over the years that even when I think of sampling, I think of truck probes and how it's gone
Hmm.
from do one probe and then grind it and call it good to now they do multiple probes. Do you have any kind of suggestions on that?
Right.
How?
No, and that's very accurate. Years and decades gone by was statement to, oh, just collect a coffee can. Give me a coffee can sample. You kind of envision somebody just scooping a coffee can off the top or out of the bottom of the truck. And then we've learned over the years that, oh, we missed this, or, oh, we hit that, and that's not right. So, yeah, definitely taking a multi probe approach is best. If we're trying to collect 2 kilograms, let's maybe pull a half a kilogram from 4 spots, or a quarter kilogram from 8 spots, and let's get the top of the truck, the middle of the truck, the bottom of the truck. Same with a rail car, or that sort of thing. And if we're pulling sample from a moving, either an auger system or our production line, the same thing, not to take it just at a single point in time, but to try and collect a subsample over the full time that unit is running, to try and get that representative result there.
Yeah, excellent. So once the sample is kind of taken, can you kind of speak to the particle size requirements, best protocols, that kind of thing?
Yes, yes, because in mycotoxins, particle size does matter, which is a bit different from some of the other industries that even Romer operates in. But when we talk about particle size, what we recommend to customers who are either using a test kit at their facility or that are sending samples in, say, to a contract lab, is you want to get that sample, say, of corn, down to a corn flour consistency. We don't want corn grits. We don't want cracked corn. We don't want to see any chunks of that corn remaining. So get it all the way down to corn flour. The USDA handbook even recommends that you want 60% to pass through a 20 mesh sieve. So they're really pushing the corn flour breakdown as well. And that pushing the particle size small just increases our opportunity to get that sample homogeneous, because if it's better ground, we can mix it better, and then we get that the better analytical result that we're looking for.
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense to me. After the webinar, there were several questions that you answered regarding method detection limits. Now, I am a layman and a journalist, and I have no idea what that is. So, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, I've actually spent a decent amount of time just this week on this topic, customers. But when we talk about detection limits and we talk about analytical methods, a test kit or a reference method, we talk about the lowest limit of mycotoxins that we can find. What's the amount that we can find, and what's the amount that we can then quantitate out of that? I'll reference back to that USDA guidebook again. I think they do a good job. And then we look at their test kit certification program, and they talk about, say, aflatoxin at 5 ppb. They want to know, they want to make sure that every test kit, every analytical method at least can detect 5 ppb of afla. If you can, great. If you can't, find a way to improve your method. We talk about looking for Don around a zero point 0.5 ppm, fumonisin the same, ochratoxin down to 5 ppb. So they're fairly low levels of contamination that we're looking for. Aflatoxins and ochratoxins, and even zearalenone, we focus in the parts per billion, where Don and fumonisin, we believe animals have a little more, not resistance to, but a tolerance, a little more tolerance to. So we're often looking at parts per million of those. But industry, both in the manufacturing industries as well as in the academic industry, continue to push requests for limits of detection lower. Not saying we're chasing that analytical zero, because we'll never get there. There'll always be some level that we can detect. But like aflatoxin, for example, fumonisin talks about 5 parts per billion. Analytically, we have methods where we can look down to 1 part per billion. Can we see 0.5? Can we see zero point 0.1? Just the more we understand impact from a toxicity standpoint or from a synergistic toxicity standpoint of what mycotoxins do to humans and animals, kind of the lower we continue to push these detection limits of interest. So along with that, of course, the lower we push the detection limits means the increased probability that we're finding mycotoxins, but we're finding it at very low levels. So then
Mhm.
you have to weigh into that conversation, what does that analytical data mean? And what do I do with it now that I can detect something at these lower levels?
Yeah, so even though there's more hits, right? It's just percentages we weren't able to really detect earlier.
Correct. Correct. Very valid.
Excellent. So, is there a difference between, say, a rapid test kit you would get from a company like Romer and reference methods?
Right. In mycotoxins, the majority of the rapid test kits that are on the market are based upon reference methods.
Mhm.
So, if we look at a lateral flow device for mycotoxins, the data that was generated as part of the validation package for that test kit included testing by HPLC or by LCMSMS. So, there is very good correlation within the mycotoxin industry when it comes to, especially in grains. If I run a corn sample, can I get a similar result on my water based lateral flow device at the probe station? And can I get a very similar result coming out of a contract lab for an LCMSMS result? And the answer is yes. When it comes to those raw grains, test kits are very good. They're very well suited. They have a strong applicability in the marketplace. So there you see very similar results. Now, where I'll caution customers is the more complex the matrix is, or
Mhm.
especially the more complex a feed or food product is, the less likely it is that you're going to find that good linearity. So, test kits struggle with complex samples. So, when
Mm.
we think maybe corn byproducts, we think pelleted animal feed, if we think feeding silages or TMRs or mixed rations or things like that, they're a very complex sample. They're going to have a lot of pigments, a lot of colorations. They could have oil content and things like that in there. So I would just caution, the further away from a simple grain we get, the higher the probability is that to really get an accurate result, we need to be using a reference method to do that.
That makes sense. I mean, That's why you probe your grain at the start.
Right, right. To know the levels going into your product for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of chatter about risk assessment happened in the webinar. Can you provide some thoughts regarding industry performed risk assessments?
Correct. It has been something that's been chattered about for a while. I think it's graining, not graining, gaining traction more as we focus on branding or as we focus on compliance, regulations, things like that. There's no one size fits all answer when it comes
Hmm.
to a risk assessment. So if companies approach us with where should we be testing, how many samples we should be pulling, what do you think about this, what do you think about that, we can't give them those answers. We can give them our thoughts on, okay, we've seen aflatoxin in corn from the upper Midwest, or oh, we see fumonisin in corn from the southern US, or, things like that. But knowing your region that you operate in, or at least the region where you're pulling your grain from, and then in that region, understanding what levels are seen and what levels are out there is really kind of step one to the risk assessment. So if you've not been testing, or if you test on more of a surveillance manner, my first recommendation would be to increase testing, maybe do a vendor survey or a crop survey or an incoming grain survey, or just something to really understand what are we taking in, what do we have going on. And from there, then you can start to work through how many samples we should be pulling, deciding for yourself at what point and at what focus you put on testing grains coming in, testing products in progress, and then testing finished products as well. From my point of view, I think you have to be testing for mycotoxins at all points. I don't think testing just on the front end is enough because something can get through. The same if you're light on testing on the front end and more heavy on the back end. You're taking up producer's risk in that regard. So it's really the quality team and the management team sitting down and working through how much risk they're willing to take at what levels to feel comfortable that they really have mycotoxins under control. At what point can you kind of draw that line in the sand and say, as long as we're doing this, we're doing everything in our power to keep it under control.
Especially with traceability being such a big issue right now. I mean,
Yes.
they're gonna track that back to you one way or another.
Yeah, yeah, and then those risk assessments, they'll have to look different depending upon the mycotoxin you're interested in. I'm going to look at aflatoxin in corn different than I'm going to look at fumonisin in rice, for example, because fumonisin in rice is not very common, but aflatoxin in corn is very common. Plus, along with the recipes, that we're producing, how much of what grain is going into our product, and so you really have to get into those details and that minutia of activities to really get a good handle on what you need to do.
It sounds more intimidating than it is, I'm sure,
Yep.
because over the last even my 8 years or so in the industry now, I mean, your rapid tests and things have really advanced and are easier to use than ever and better quality than ever. And so you can really
Yes.
set something up.
Yep, and I agree with that because I've been working in mycotoxins for a little over 19 years myself, and I started in an analytical lab 20 years ago. We were doing corn testing in a lab by HPLC because that was kind of the gold standard, and that's what everybody did. And then over the years, as test kits really became more available, USDA certification programs or AOAC approval programs gained better traction. Then we started seeing customers take that corn testing to their facilities. And then we start testing more the feed products or the complex corn byproducts or things that test kits can't handle. And,
Yeah.
10 years ago, test kits were even solvent based. We were selling to customers, but they were needing to use acetonitrile water or a methanol water, a hazardous solvent that they then had to dispose of in those test kits. Well, the last few years, test kits have now transitioned to water-based extraction. So it's safer that for their employees, safer on the environment, all of those things. So I agree as we continue to push the boundaries on analytical capabilities and ease of use for the customers, the industry and where we test and how we monitor continues to evolve.
Excellent. I I'm sure you guys will continue to evolve as the years go on too. Don't worry, you'll have the mixed products down eventually. You'll be able to test everything.
Eventually, eventually, I agree. I agree. Someday.
uh, so those are all the questions I have. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I guess the main thing is that, there'll always be mycotoxins. As we stated, they're driven by weather patterns. Currently, there's nothing that can be done once there's contamination in a grain to remove it. Can't process it out of there. We can't get it out of there. So if it's there, the industry to continue to work to divert it, applicable channels for human food, pet food, animal feed purposes. But so it's always going to be there. And I think regulatory means will continue to tighten. I think we'll push those limits lower or add additional mycotoxins.
Yeah.
Regulation currently is focused on aflatoxin. There's guidance on DON and fumonisin. But I mentioned we do a lot of zearalenone testing, but zearalenone's currently not a regulated toxin. Same
Mhm.
with T2 and HG2. So I think there's things that'll continue to drive the industry. And some of that's just as the research furthers, the understanding furthers, develops on truly herd health
Mhm.
aspects and the impact of these toxins, even at very low levels on animals or in levels, synergistic effects. I think as we understand more there, it helps to guide the industry. Then we can throw in the topics of emerging mycotoxins as well. Mycotoxins have been known for hundreds of years, can go back to some of the early plague events and hypothesize that mycotoxins played a role. So, but
Oh
even with
wow.
that, we're still discovering new mycotoxins or understanding the impact of new mycotoxins, onto herd health as well.
That's great to know. I didn't know
Yep.
about the plague possible origins.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, I mean, mycotoxins are what byproducts of mold, right? So mold's always
Yes.
been here and always will be.
That's right.
We can
That's
do
right.
about that.
Yep, yep. And in this particular case, yeah, mold and the metabolism of the mold making the mycotoxins definitely problematic. But like you said, mold's always been around, and some molds, such as penicillins, proven to be a very good thing for us.
And plus, I mean, testing for all that stuff. I mean, it's nice to be ahead of the regulatory process
Yes,
sometimes,
yes, I agree. I agree.
and it adds a nice value add to your product as well.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate you stopping by and having a chat about mycotoxins and what they're doing out there. Thanks for everyone who is listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and make sure you check out that webinar if you haven't yet, and stay tuned for any content. All right, bye, Christy.
All right. Thank you, Stephen.